Welcome to the Learneezee cast. I'm Rico Lazo, joined by the always insightful Patrick Bastien. Today, our guest is Ankush Vengurlekar. Ankush is a seasoned storyteller helping to raise awareness for underrepresented communities. With over a decade of experience, he has coached 400 plus organizations worldwide, helping them grow their brands and raise funds. Join us as we explore Ankush's remarkable journey and discover the power of storytelling in transforming social impact businesses. Welcome, Ankush. How are you today?
Very good. Thank you so much, Rico. You made me sound better than I am, I guess.
Well, we're happy to have you, of course. And Patrick, my co host, how are you today?
Yeah, I'm great, Rico. Looking forward to learning more about Ankush and his social enterprise. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, let's go ahead and jump right into the questions. Can you tell us where you're originally from and the languages you speak, Ankush?
Absolutely. Thank you. And Patrick and Rico, it's a pleasure again to be here today. I am originally from India. I grew up in Mumbai, which is also called Bombay when we were young, and then had the honor and pleasure of working in Delhi and all across India. About 8 years ago, we moved to Austin, Texas. But India is where the heart is, where the home is. Austin is now a second home as well. I speak English, I speak Hindi, I speak my native tongue, which is Marathi. And so, yeah, those are some of the languages. I also understand about half a dozen languages that we speak in the Indian subcontinent because of all the work that I've been able to do with nonprofits, with indigenous communities and leaders, and so on and so forth.
Well, it's very, very interesting to hear, your prowess with languages. And that's probably the defining element of many of our guests being multilingual, polyglots, at least bilingual in every single case, I believe. So, can you share with us one of the most impactful storytelling campaigns you've worked on for underrepresented communities, Ankush?
Absolutely. And, it's almost like asking a filmmaker what their favorite movie was, or asking an actor what their favorite role was, which is so difficult because, especially in the space that I work in, which is the impact, mission driven, social impact space, it's each campaign is unique. Each campaign comes with its share of challenges, and each campaign comes with its share of possibilities. But one campaign that I vividly remember due to the sheer numbers that were involved is I'm associated with this organization in India called Ekta Parishad, which translates as the Parliament of the Landless. So in this campaign, we had 25,000 25,000 farmers, men, women, children, elderly, people with disabilities walk for 60 kilometers. That's about, I believe, 40 miles. Walk in the heat of the summer when it's 100, 120-degree Fahrenheit and appeal to the government officials to pay heed to the demands for land. What I was specifically doing is designing the entire media, public relations, and digital presence for this movement. Now, mind you, this is a 35-year-old movement, but they were very, very social media shy. They were very camera shy. They were very shy to take their word out to the online audiences. And it was phenomenal. In a span of 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks, we were able to reach 2 million people online. We had India's biggest news articles, websites talking about this campaign. We had at least three international publications talking about this protest march. And that somewhere just shakes you to your core when you're a part of something like that. When everybody marched in a line, it would be a march of 7 kilometers. I think that's about 4 miles. The group would be 4 miles long on the road, and everybody would march in a single file and making sure that we are not impeding the traffic and we are not causing any pain and any inconvenience to others. It was one of the most incredible experiences that I've been a part of, Rico.
Wow, sounds very, very impressive to say the least. You clearly have a lot of experience, working with these communities, and so to hear that story is very impactful for sure.
I'm just curious, in your role in this particular project, you were doing a lot of the work for the social media part of it. Were you also in charge of the finances there as well to try to get enough money to sponsor all those people? Like, because that's something that's hard to even imagine getting enough funding for all of this.
Absolutely, Patrick. Great question. So I was, in a way, you could call the campaign's director for this. And so we were making sure that our stories reach the right people. And then we had volunteers who were part of the fundraising team. Their job was to take the stories that our campaigns team created and build upon that and run fundraisers. When the organization does a foot march like that, Patrick, the preparation begins 2 years in advance. And how they prepare is every week they will take one fistful of rice or lentils and keep that aside. They have grain banks across thousands of villages in India when they are preparing for a foot march like this because they're like, we don't want to rely on anybody else's generosity. It's our struggle. We will prepare for this. So it's almost like a savings bank account that you have where you're saving enough for the next 2 years to be able to support you for the next 2 weeks that you're going to do 2 years later. I'm telling you, the level of planning and the level of logistics in this is so incredible. So all the food that we need for those 2 weeks or 1 week on the road, people start collecting that 2 years in advance. So, and these are poor people, these are daily wage laborers, these are farm workers. So what do they have? They have one fist of rice. They can put that aside. And at the same time, when they're marching on the street, we have these earthen pots that we carry on the head, the marchers carry on the head. And you're moved when you see such a beautifully organized, well-disciplined, peaceful protest movement that's walking. People are just compelled to ask, wait, what is happening? And they're like, okay, you're marching for land rights. You're marching for women's rights. And then they're like, wait, how can I contribute? So people give literally like 2 cents, 1 cent, 5 cents, that kind of money. And when the power of the poor and the power of many, but when thousands and thousands of such people give that money, that translates into a lot of money. And that's the sort of power where anybody who's come through grassroots activism movements knows the power of the plenty.
Well, that's a very interesting insight into how these organizations can raise these funds and be somewhat self-sufficient. And it kind of is a segue into my next question. So hopefully there's more you can add to this question. But we've spoken before we went live on air that you've coached many organizations, of course,
Right.
Throughout your career. And the question we had is, what are some common challenges you've observed when it comes to building brands and generating funds for social impact businesses, which may be different from a campaign? So can you help us just
Right.
understand how you help them overcome these challenges in regards to building brands and generating funds?
Absolutely, Rico. Such an important topic. And I must admit, I'm an accidental marketer and an accidental fundraiser, so to speak. I mean, I graduated in agriculture. I farmed for close to 5 years. I then started mobilizing farmers in and around my own farm, just trying to push everybody towards sustainable farming, low input agriculture, so on and so forth. And I realized pretty early in the day that, okay, I love to mobilize people towards improving their own situation and do more with less. And so that's sort of the running theme over here. Social impact and nonprofit work is mission driven. We lead with our heart. And when you lead with your heart, your passion and your mission is what drives you. You do not necessarily think in a strategic manner, which is great in its own way, but that also poses challenges in its own way. So, because it is so passion driven, the focus is on doing the good work. Because you identify a problem area or you identify a gap area, you're leading with how can I fill this gap? What can I do in my own capacity? And then, of course, you fall on your network, your circle on can we help and fill this gap? And in this process, if the person who is starting this as a passion, if they themselves are a storyteller, these brands become good brands, like we have seen across the world. And sure, I mean, people like Greta, people like Malala, people like a lot of brands that have been built around a single individual who started a movement. But if this person is shy and if this person is more focused on doing the work on the ground, then these stories pretty much never see the light of the day beyond the immediate circle that they are working in. And Rico, my biggest learning over the years has been that, and the reason that I continue to work and do what I do, even 400 plus organizations later, is these are all such incredibly passionate stories of people who are making the world so much better. So we start with that. We start with reminding them that what you're doing is so phenomenal and so rare in this world where people are more and more oriented towards shorter gains. The attention span is much shorter. You are looking at a longer picture because social change is at least a 2 to 3 generation process. It's not immediate, it's very incremental. And sometimes we even take 5 steps back. So a lot of these passion mission driven organizations, we take pause and we remind them that your work is great if more and more people participate in that. And so the process of fundraising and building a brand is a process, somewhere it's a very cathartic process. It's a process of reflection and introspection where you're pausing and you're looking at, it's a simple question. Do you think you'll be able to go around if you're doing what you're doing for the next 5 years, 10 years? And in most cases, Rico and Patrick, the organization or the activist realizes, I may not be able to do this for long if I exhaust my existing goodwill. And that's where we try and shift them towards this process of building an online brand, or even not necessarily an online brand, but just building a brand. Because online is good if you want to reach urban, semi urban, millennial audiences. We want ourselves to be a self sustaining circular mechanism. And what can we do in terms of telling our own stories, which are of value to our own community? And we find a way that the community supports this storytelling initiative because at the end of the day, we are serving ourselves. And these were indigenous communities who have been passing on stories for at least 3 to 4 thousand years, who understand the power of passing on generational knowledge, preserving ancestral knowledge, so on and so forth.
Well, thank you for that, Ankush. I mean, it sounds like, it really does depend on the type of organization. You mentioned, are they a rural based organization? Who is the person in charge of the organization? What kind of personality do they have? Do they like to be the orator, the speaker, the face of the organization? Do they not? So, very interesting. Thank you for providing that insight.
Absolutely.
When it comes to storytelling, I'd like to go to the next question a little bit. Could you tell us a little bit more about this organization you co-founded called Adivasi Lives Matter? Can you give us a little bit of a detail how that came about, that you ended up co-founding this organization, and exactly what does it do for the audience?
Absolutely, Patrick. Thank you. Thank you for that question. And the origin or the birth of Adivasi Lives Matter is actually a pretty interesting story. So in 2016, when I was already working with nonprofits, coaching small grassroots organizations and larger ones alike on building their brand and telling their stories, the what was at the core of my belief was, how can we tell stories by the people who live these realities? Because it's always different if I were to tell your story, Patrick. It's always going to be a one sided story if I would talk about you, Rico, and your life in Colorado growing up. Whereas if I just give you the microphone and I ask you, hey, why don't you tell me about yourself? One, it gives a sense of ownership. Two, the dignity in storytelling is always preserved when the agency lies with the storyteller. Because I may tend to focus on one aspect, which may not be something that you would like to share with the world, right? And so with this in mind, in 2016, I picked up my bike. I had been an avid biker up until then and had been biking for at least 10 years till then. But 2016, I decided to pick up my bike and I biked 2,000 kilometers. I think that's close to, I don't know, 1,500 miles, or I could be wrong on that. But 2,000 kilometers, I spent 2 months on the road in the eastern part of India with a very simple agenda. I wanted to learn more and unlearn all of the things that I had known or not known about the indigenous communities of India. And that one thing was, oh my gosh, it held a mirror in front of me like nobody's business. From everything from realizing my own privileges growing up in urban India, to realizing the ethnic, racial, caste, class privilege that I had, to realizing that all the mining that I was seeing visibly in front of my eyes was essentially to feed the materialistic, consumeristic lifestyle that urban people live, whereas the rural people are losing their land, their livelihood, in a lot of cases, even their lives, to give us the luxuries of life, the conveniences of life. And all this while I'm meeting indigenous elders, I'm meeting nonprofit organizations, I'm meeting some incredible 15, 16, 17-year-old indigenous boys and youth who are escaping prison time or who are running away from the government. Why? Just because they are asking their fellow citizens to ask for their rights, to fight for their rights, to stand for their rights. And then I'm like, my goodness, these stories. I mean, I was already a content creator. I was telling stories, I was making videos. A couple of my videos went viral. This was 2016, and I had a million plus views on a couple of my videos. And so one part of me was like, okay, fine, I could tell these stories. But the other part of me was, wait, but I would just come here once every year, maybe. What about the reality that is being lived on a day-to-day basis? So that became the birth of this thought on how can we enable our indigenous brothers and sisters to tell their own stories in their own words, in their own languages. Adivasi is the Indian term for indigenous peoples. And so this incredible indigenous young photojournalist that I met on my ride, Ashish Biruli, his works were already displayed across Japan, France, Canada. And I was like, wait, Ashish, you're already a photographer. You know the story. You know the power of stories. And so Ashish and I ideated on this and we thought, okay, can we create a platform where indigenous youth come forth and tell their own stories? And that's how this organization was birthed. We enable indigenous youth to tell their own stories in their own languages. India has 35% of the world's indigenous people. Indian indigenous communities speak over 400 languages. And it's insane. There are more than 700 tribes. The histories, the languages, some of them are 6,000 years old. And so for the last 4 years, we have been able to train more than 300 indigenous youth. They've generated more than 500 content pieces. So from articles to short videos to long format videos. And it's a multi-award winning organization. It was almost like we sort of opened the curtain and the world saw what was there all along. It wasn't like we introduced them to anything, but now urban people and international folks came and saw the beautiful, rich culture, history, knowledge of the indigenous communities of India. So it's been a very humbling experience. Hugely, hugely grateful for all the communities that allow us to work with them.
Well, it's been very interesting to hear, your storytelling. It's coming out in the interview today, of course. You're a very eloquent and a wonderful storyteller, and this is a sort of a segue into the next question we have, because you've done so much good work with these communities, with these social impact businesses, talking about how they can be telling their own story versus you telling the story on their behalf. But I mean, how do you help them to effectively communicate their mission and connect with their target audience, especially if perhaps these people are not confident? You mentioned the youth telling their stories, but how do you work with them to enable them or to empower them to become better storytellers so that they can then effectively connect with their target audience, effectively let the world know about their mission?
That's a great question, Rico. And we have and continue to reflect on this question even now, because one is people like you, Patrick, Rico, and me, we live in parts of the world where internet access, self expression is, we don't even think about it. We don't have to think twice about it. But we also know of more than half of the world where the policies, the expressions are heavily monitored. I mean, not everybody has the freedom to express the way they are. And so, Rico, when we address storytelling or expression, it comes with a very basic question to begin with. Do you want to tell these stories? Just because we see value in it is no reason at all for anybody to tell their stories, because that is another sort of emotional labor that we are imposing on the communities on whom global policies have always imposed. We seldom, the governments or people from urban localities, seldom go and ask the communities in semi-rural or semi-urban places, what is it that you want? Nonprofits have been guilty of this world over, where nonprofits think that this is what the community wants and we go and impose it on them. But we come with a very basic understanding of working in communities. If it has to be long term, if it has to be sustainable, it has to be owned by the community. And ownership comes with a very simple question. Do you want to do this? If and only if the answer is yes, then we come into the equation and we are like, all right, if you think you want to do this, we can help you do this. So it's never, and especially when we're working with indigenous communities, young people, we have been very clear from day one, even in our nonprofit, we shall not introduce smartphones if people are not using them already. We shall not go and introduce internet in communities that are not already using it. Because we have seen the other end of this spectrum where internet and smartphone is great, but it's also a disease that can never ever be rectified once you've got that disease. Because then it's sadly a never ending slope. Then you need Instagram telling you switch off from the app. Then you need apps to remind you, okay, you're spending too much time on the phone. So we know that this is unfortunately sometimes a slippery slope. And so the agency of deciding to embrace the internet, embrace the smartphone, that always lies with the community members. It's not so black and white as all of us know, because they obviously have push and pull factors influenced by media and television and radio and all of that. But we try and not influence these decisions as much as possible. Once they do agree and understand that this is what needs to be done and they are willing to bring their word in front of the world, Rico, even after that, the recipe is so different for each and every community that we work with, because and that's one of the other shortcomings. We think, okay, one size fits all. It never does. The goals are different. The tools, the platforms, whether it's TikTok or Instagram Reels or YouTube, all of that is secondary, I would say. But at the same time, it becomes a very important part of the conversation, Rico, because you do not want to be telling stories in a written form today, because people are not reading as many articles. Attention span is shorter and shorter. The currency of conversation today is short form video. And so that's where we get into the nuance of how should we tell our stories. If it really depends on the goals you want. If the goal is to reach as many people as early as you can, then let's go with the mediums that the world is using, which is short form video. If the goal is to archive traditional ancestral knowledge, let's stick to long form content, which YouTube could be better suited for that. If the goal is to get into deeper investigative pieces, it could be mini documentaries. If it's low resource, it could be articles, so on and so forth. So it really is driven by the goals that the organization has. How much time do they have? How patient are they in this? And at the bottom of everything, it's their willingness to do it all. Do they have the capacity and do they have the willingness?
I love that you mentioned that it's not an imposition in any way. It's
Never.
asking for their decision to want to participate, right? You're opening it up for discussion. Do you want to participate in this? And
Always.
that is empowering. And then it's very customized around the goals of the organization and the individuals involved. So I think that sounds like the best approach. Like you mentioned, it's not a one size fits all. It's not a cookie cutter approach. It's very much tailor made to every organization. And so that was the question, that was the follow up, was like, what is the tip? And I think maybe I answered it right there. It's just tailor it to the organizations that you're working with. But above all, ask for their openness to want to participate versus it being an imposition.
And I would like to add to that the rawness of real stories stands over and above any sort of curated, well edited video or article or anything. And I think that has been the biggest learning for me over the last decade plus of telling stories and enabling communities to tell stories. We need to understand that this concept of perfection also comes from a colonial mindset, because what is perfect is defined by a select group of individuals who have access and opportunity to those mediums for centuries together. You are now imposing your ideas of perfection on people who are using these mediums for the first time ever. So these are extremely colonialistic ideologies and definitions in languages, in medium of expression, and in just how you express. What could be cringe for an urban person could be raw and real for a semi-urban person or a rural person. And what we've realized over the years is that each story has its own audience. And sometimes I, as a facilitator or a trainer, am quite low in my understanding of what this might resonate with, who this might resonate with, right? 100 brains are always going to be able to think more and better than one brain or one person. And so that the rawness of it all, the truth of it all, and mind you, I'm not using the word authentic, because authentic is a very misused and abused word. There is authenticity is constantly in a state of change. There is no finiteness in it. You cannot say that, okay, the world did not move ahead after 1600 or after 1990. It is in a constant state of flux, which is why I'm not saying authentic. I'm saying true to what the community feels. If the community thinks something is true to them, that's all that matters.
Wow, that's great. Ankush, I'm just thinking about my own experience working with not indigenous communities, but social organizations, and this is great advice to just kind of focus on what they believe is right for them, and then just assist them. If they want your assistance, that's great. And if they're not ready, then just keep an open mind for the future, and you can always come back, and then they can find you when they are prepared to tell their story. We're moving towards the end of our discussion. We could ask you so much more questions on how you got to this point of creating and connecting to all these social and indigenous communities, so social organizations and indigenous communities. But we are an online, organization, and we're curious about how you use social media to get the word out about these projects, and what impact does social media have in general for your projects, or like you mentioned that you tailor each project for whether or not they need it or not. But could you give some general idea of what you think the impact of social media is on your work?
Oh, incredible. The impact is unfathomable, Patrick. And I'll give you an example of this. I mean, the nonprofit that we co founded, Ashish, Isha, and I, three of us co founders, we co founded this in 2016-17 loosely, where we were basically just bootstrapping and putting whatever money we had into this. And when COVID hit, some of the worst affected communities were the communities that lived in villages, because you don't have television cameras, you don't have radio crew, you don't have the stories coming out. But thankfully, because of the networks that we have and because of the work that we were doing, we knew firsthand the effect on people's loss of livelihood, on lack of medicine, vaccination, so on and so forth. When COVID hit, because of the insistence of our communities, we ran a fundraiser, and we had a goal to raise 20 lakh rupees, roughly $25,000. We hit that in about 10, 12 days. We thought that maybe in a couple of months we'll be able to. We did an online crowdfunding campaign, which was obviously then disseminated all over social media, from Condé Nast magazine to the biggest, from Vogue magazine to the Condé Nast Traveler magazine to some of the biggest Bollywood celebrities to some of the biggest journalists. Everybody shared our fundraiser appeal, not because we asked them to, but because they realized that we were working in a community, in the communities, in the geographies in India where the government was pretty much absent. So it became viral on its own. The fundraiser went from 25,000, which we were able to achieve in 10, 12 days instead of 2 months. From 25,000, we raised another $75,000. I think the world saw the best and worst of humanity during COVID. We always like to say that. And we are no different to that. We saw the best of humanity. We saw the best of social media during that time. Our teams went through an absolute mental burnout, because on one side were the stories of people who were losing lives, losing livelihoods, didn't have place to even bury their loved ones. And on the other side was this insane shower of love and support that we had from people who had never seen us, met us, spoken to us, but were supporting us from across the world. That is just insane. I mean, even now, the work that I do, I live in Austin, Texas. I work with this organization called Foundation for the Homeless. We work with homeless families in Austin, Texas. And social media is just the biggest binding factor from getting. So we have a breakfast program where we feed homeless people in Austin breakfast twice a week, Tuesdays and Thursday mornings from 5 to 8 a.m. And what's fascinating and really, really, it gives me a lot of joy is we say that the young people are just invested in their phones and they don't give a damn about each other. But every Tuesday, Thursday, Patrick, we have at least 15 to 20 youth who are in Texas A&M, UT Austin. These young people are coming and volunteering at 5 in the morning, mind you. So all the perceptions that people have is that the young people don't really give a damn, the Gen Z is not really caring about others. We have evidence, and they connect with us through social media. And so social media has enabled this incredible floodgate, so to speak, in terms of do-gooders. And we see so many examples of that. Charity Water, the nonprofit, is one of the biggest examples of this, and how they enable social media giving. I repeat this again: a farmer, an agriculturist like me, could not be where I am today had it not been for the power of social media. Have run n number of fundraisers, have done n number of campaigns through the power of the free platforms that we have at our disposal. So, for all the bad that social media brings in the world, I always say this to everyone. I'm like, if you think social media is bad, you may not be using it in the right way, because there's incredible amount of good that social media brings about, and we are living proof of that.
Well, Ankush, it has been just inspirational to hear you speak and share your stories through your storytelling, through your experience. I'm inspired. I feel like I need to learn how to be a better storyteller and share the stories that I've experienced. But I really want to say thank you for coming onto the Learn Easy cast. And I hope our audience has been impacted the way that I have been, and I'm sure for you, Patrick, as well.
Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to share my learnings, and for making this incredible time.
Absolutely, Ankush. Well, we'll certainly be in touch. I want to wish you the best of luck for you and your projects and the communities that you serve.
People can follow me on Instagram and YouTube and LinkedIn. I go by the name Digital Karma. This is where I enable people to tell their own stories. So would love to connect with all of you.
Yes, we will definitely put that into the show notes and make sure that people can connect with you and help you in your efforts to bring awareness to these issues and hopefully even raise some funds for you and your organizations to do the good work that you're already doing. Thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us. We really do appreciate your coming on to the show.
Thank you so much.
What an incredible interview. Ankush blew me away with his eloquence, his storytelling, his story, and ultimately the impact he's made over the years of his professional career, working with all these different organizations, impacting communities in such a positive way. Wow, I was truly impressed.
Yeah, me too. I'm just so inspired by his words and how he was able to do all this in such a short amount of time. When you think about his organization and how he's really tailoring every single mission that he's taking part in to make it work for these indigenous communities. My hat's off to him.
Absolutely. But with that being said, Pat, we always like to catch up and see what's going on in your corner of the world. So, what's been on your mind as of late?
Yeah, I just wanted to share a little bit about what I've been watching and how things are connecting to each other. I mean, we were talking about AI a while ago, the last episode, and how it's helping people. But then now we have an example of how the threat of the AI revolution is causing problems, in particular for writers and actors. I've heard about this, and I've been watching a bit about the writers and striking, and then now the actors in the U.S. and I've been kind of moved to think, wow, AI for me is a tool I use for my work, to help me, code a little better as an engineer, and maybe sometimes come up with some better text that for particular projects that I'm working on for Learneezee. And it's just it was interesting how just in a couple of weeks you've seen both sides of it, right? The threat of it replacing actors and writers, and then of course the gift that it is, and what a kind of tool it is. I'll leave it to that I think it's always about how you use the tool, especially similar to Ankush's point about social media. Yeah, if you're seeing it as a threat, then maybe you're not utilizing it in the best way you can. But that's been what's been on my mind. And how about for you, Rico?
Yeah, well, I would just say that, certainly AI is something that is for many people very new, even though it's been around for quite some time. And to your point, it is a tool, and any tool can be misused or be used for doing harm rather than good. And I think what's really maybe a scary thought, just I've read about this, is that even though, there's all this talk about how AI is going to impact lives, and I think this is a case in point with these actors and writers and others whose jobs have been put at risk. We're still at the very nascent tip of the iceberg movement with AI. And so with anything, there's still so much to be determined and learned. We don't truly know. I mean, I use ChatGPT almost on an everyday basis and other AI tools with my clients. And so, we still have a lot to learn about how it can be used. And hopefully, we hear more success stories than sort of those troubling stories of how it's causing harm. But that's to be determined. But thanks so much, Patrick. It was a great show today. And as always, everyone, keep learning easy. And until next time.
Keep learning easy, guys.